Welcome back to the DDT Method podcast. Today we have another expert from the world of biohacking and longevity, and that is Mr. Hunter Williams. Hunter Williams is blowing up on the scene in the advanced living, human optimization, and biohacking communities as a well-known source of information and a very thorough educator in his own right. Hunter is the man when it comes to all things peptides, biohacking, performance enhancement, and longevity. And today we get to sit down and pick his brain on all of those things. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the DDT Method podcast with Hunter Williams. What would you say to somebody that's interested in performance enhancement, but their spectrum of knowledge is limited to those kind of cliche anabolic steroids, clenbuterol, your basics of growth hormone? Like, how much more is there out there to optimize physique and performance?
I would say the typical bodybuilder matrix or framework around what you do to prep your physique to look the best ever is maybe 10 to 15% of what we have access to right at this moment. So take all the clen, take all the DHT derivatives, take all the ancillaries that we know people use to prep for a bodybuilding show. I'd say that's really 15%. And right now, at this moment, we have access to, I would say, probably another 80 or 85% that's out there that we can harness. And on top of that, maintain health and energy to where we don't have to suffer abysmally going into a show, a bodybuilding show, or even if you're not doing a bodybuilding show, just to look good for summer or kind of get ready for a photo shoot and look good with your family, your wife, your girlfriend, or whoever. So I'm really excited about bringing that some of that knowledge to the listeners today. But there's a lot out there, and we're going to break that down.
If that didn't automatically capture everybody's attention to the fullest extent, then nothing will. So awesome. So we're going to dive into this right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning into the DDT Method podcast. I have a very special guest with you here today. That's Hunter Williams, who is, in my opinion, a complete expert in all things performance enhancement, all things longevity, all things peptide, all things small molecule, everything that we have out there at our disposal in the biohacking world. This is Hunter's world. So that's why I wanted to ask him the question, what more is out there? Because I knew the answer was going to be a lot, but 10 to 15%, like talking about that's what we know about, that leaves a crazy amount on the table. So we're going to dive into all of that today, and we're going to give you guys some actionable take home, some stuff that you can do some research on yourself and then find out how to get it, apply it, put it into your regime, and not only get the results that you're looking for, but probably be a little bit healthier for doing so as well. Before we dive into all of that, Hunter, give us a little bit of background on yourself. What kind of brought you to the dance, so to speak? What's your background, and what exactly is it that you do?
Yeah, so from the athletic side of things, I come from the football world. So growing up, I always tell people I didn't know what age I chose to play football. Football chose me, I guess. I was probably 3 or 4 years old. My parents would tell me like I would go up to the TV when football games were on and be like banging on the TV. That's what I wanted to do. So really from the age of 6 and 7, my entire life was to get to the NFL. And I had parents that helped support me, but that was really like something that motivated me. So growing up, I was a football player, and everything in my life really was to become the best football player possible. So went through like little league football, then get to high school. And I remember being in high school and just thinking, man, I was a 14-year-old. You get there and I was at a pretty, what would be considered like a powerhouse high school football team. And some of these guys were so huge. So I was like, I got to do anything I can to keep up, whether that's lifting weights, running, doing extra training, supplementation. I was very blessed in the sense that my parents were always kind of into health and fitness stuff. They weren't competitive or anything like that, but they were very fit people. They worked outside for a living. My dad's a landscaper. So that's where I say I kind of got my start, was from the football world. Now, coming out of high school, I was not the biggest or most athletic player, as a lot of white linebackers are. I was kind of undersized and stuff. I was like 6 foot, like 195, 200 pounds coming to high school, but I was really good. And I didn't get any offers, even though I was really skilled and talented. So I decided to walk on. So I went to Wake Forest University. I got some academic scholarships to go there and went to Wake Forest and walked on. And my kind of thought at the time was, I want to put myself to the test and see if I can play Division I football. And to go back to being a child, literally that's all I dreamed about. I didn't care. I cared about school in as much as it helped serve my football goals. And I was really good at school, straight A student and stuff, but it was really just because I wanted to be good at football and give myself an opportunity to play football. So did that, walked on, and then going into my redshirt sophomore year there, I got put on scholarship and then started for 3 years, became a captain and everything. And through that, I really learned how to hone in on details and focus in every area that relates to performance. So that's kind of where my brain really started to optimize. Okay, diet, nutrition, training, all these different things go down to the most minute detail to result in a game of inches that what I ate during that week, what I did in the weight room, and all those things literally are being magnified to the nth degree on a football field. So that's kind of my background, and that actually led me into this. So graduated, I almost made it to the NFL. So I did our pro day and stuff, got contacted by a couple teams, never made it to a camp or anything like that. But I think for what I did to have not gotten any scholarship offers or anything like that, it proved to me that I was like, okay, if I put my mind to something and really focus on it and go detail-oriented, balls to the wall, that I can do it. So that's kind of my background from this. I know a lot of people in this world come from like bodybuilding or different things. I'm a football player. I'm a football player at heart. If someone gave me a piece of paper right now to go play, I would still do it. Probably not. But I always joke around and say that because that's how much I love football. But I've got 3 younger brothers, and I've kind of got to live vicariously through them as they've kind of come up and gone to college. I only wish now that I had access to some of the stuff I know now when I was in college, because I would have been even that much better. And at the time, I thought I was doing everything right, but that was 10 plus years ago, and our knowledge now, even compared to back then, is far superior. So that led me to kind of where we are today. Once I graduated from college, I majored in finance in school and thought I was going to do Wall Street, do banking and all this stuff. Got a job in that. And after a few months, I was like, okay, this is not for me. So I just moved back home. It's like, I want to start a business. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what it is. But real estate sounds kind of cool because all you need is a phone and a car and you can start a business. So got into the real estate world. And I used to drive around when I first started. This was when I was 23 years old. And I would listen to podcasts. And I listened to like real estate podcasts on how to be good at sales, how to do all this stuff. And I listened to this one day, and there was this guy on there named Jay Campbell. And he was a real estate agent, but he was talking a lot about fasting and testosterone and training and stuff. And I was like, wow, this is actually much more interesting to me than real estate. Let me go check out this guy's podcast. So I started listening to his podcast and everything. And he had books. He had, I think back then it was the Metabolic Blowtorch Diet, the Testosterone Replacement Therapy Manual. So being the sponge that I was, I just soaked that all in. And it was kind of I think everyone that listens to podcasts like these, you might not work in this space, but it's your guilty pleasure. You love to consume content around it. You love to optimize like every facet of your life. And I was one of those people. I worked in real estate, but really I was passionate about health and fitness. And I saw, kind of like I was as an athlete, I always tell people like I live my life as a football player now. So like everything that I do is really just being a football player and putting myself in the shoes of optimizing every facet of performance to get the end goal. So I ended up doing pretty well in real estate. One, because I was physically healthy, and your energy levels matter when you're consulting with people and doing things. So anyway, I started consuming Jay's content and from afar. And I remember one day he had written an email or something, and I just replied back to that email and said, hey man, thanks for everything you've done for me. You really have changed my life in terms of like understanding diet, training, and everything. And he replied back, and then he kind of started mentoring me from afar. But during this time, I'd say it was like 24, 25, I started to have a severe sense of anxiety and depression. And I thought it was stress related from work because at that time, my real estate career had started to take off. I was getting busy. I was getting a bunch of clients. And I just remember feeling like this impending sense of doom on me at all times. I would even be driving around during the day, going between appointments, between houses with people. And I would be going on the highway, and I would feel like I'd have to like pull over to the side of the road because like my heart would be racing. I was like, what is going on? Like I thought, like 18-wheelers going by me would like freak me out. Driving, I was like, what is going on here? And at the time, I was extremely physically fit. So like if you saw me in a picture, I'd have a six-pack, like I look good. I wasn't huge or anything like that. It was a lot smaller than when I played football. But I was like, what is going on? I train right. I eat perfectly. I do all these things. Why do I feel this way? And it was through some of Jay's work. Also, anyone that has ever played a contact sport or been in the military, I recommend you check out Dr. Mark Gordon's work, because he does a lot of this work in kind of the concussion-related testosterone realm or arena. But what I ended up finding out was that I had severely low testosterone, and that testosterone deficiency really came from all the concussions that I sustained playing football. Now, I never had an official concussion where I quote unquote blacked out or anything like that, but I played football from the age of 7 until I was 23. So that's 16 seasons of around the year, constantly banging your head in, constantly getting impacted and all those things. And when I say this, I'm not unique to anyone out there that's ever played a contact sport. So it wasn't like my brain responded differently than anyone that plays contact sports, because I know my friends now that I played with, they get their testosterone checked in the same thing. I think when I got it checked multiple times, it was like 160, it was like 88. So it was in that like 80 to 160 total range. And most of my friends that I know that played football, that's the same thing now that they're in their 30s. That's what they have. And a lot of them don't even know it. They think they have to take antidepressants or anything, along those lines. And it's not the case. So what ends up happening is when you play a contact sport, your pituitary gets rattled around. And then over time, the HPTA axis starts to shut down. And then you don't have any testosterone. So luckily, I was in contact with Jay. He was able to help put me in touch with doctors and everything. When you're in your 20s and you want to start testosterone therapy, God forbid you get a little bit of testosterone, because the medical establishment will do everything in their power, even if you go through a clinic, to prevent you from getting it. But was able to go through like a battery of tests and did the whole like Clomid, HCG thing, and then eventually was able to get on testosterone. So that's what led me to this. And then eventually, like, I started doing a lot of marketing work behind the scenes for Jay, just from my real estate background. I was really good with understanding digital marketing, kind of like on the back end side of things. So started to help him some, and he was mentoring me, obviously, when it relates to testosterone and peptides. And then I kind of started also publishing my own content on YouTube and just kind of sharing my experiences around peptides, around testosterone and stuff. And that's how I got into this. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, but came from the football world. And then sometimes the worst things that happen to us, like when I went through those few years of really bad depression and stress and anxiety, ended up being the best thing, because now I can share my experience with other guys. And I think, whether you've played contact sports or been in the military or not, there's an epidemic of low testosterone among men and women in the country right now. So that's kind of how I got into it. But yeah.
So there's a few things to be said here, and then I promise we'll get into the supplements and the drugs and the medications that everybody really wants to hear. But I want to talk a little bit first about dedication. I want to talk about mentorship. I want to talk about perseverance, just because now I was unaware of your story until just now, and it's crazy to me how much that almost mirrors my own. So I've told my story on the podcast before, so I'm not going to dive into the whole thing. But the short of it essentially was I grew up wanting to be a professional wrestler, a little bit less conventional than football, I'm sure. But I had decided that that's what I wanted to do. I started training when I was 18 years old. I went to college and I majored in exercise science, specifically because I figured I could learn how to get bigger for pro wrestling. I ended up doing fairly well for myself on an independent level. I ended up getting recruited by WWE in my mid-20s. I worked there in their farm league under contract for 2 years. Then I got released because there was nothing for me on television at the time. So it was a simply pack your bags, we'll call you if we need you type situation. And there I was in my mid to late 20s. That's really all I had been doing. But along the way, I had accumulated all this knowledge of training, health, and longevity, because the same thing you were saying, absorbing all this information to just get better at football, better at football, better at football. Oh, wait. I'm kind of fucking smart at this other stuff now, because the whole way along, I was supplementing my income as a personal trainer. I had to get certifications to do that. I had to learn about nutrition. Nutrition certifications in the early 2000s weren't that easy to come by. So coaching was just starting then. So I would hire coaches from the bodybuilding world, from the strength and conditioning world. I would just scrape every penny I had so I could hire these people to teach me. Then WWE came, WWE left. I was making some money traveling wrestling. I was making some money doing some personal training stuff and some very low-level coaching type stuff. But I was listening to Ben Pakulski's podcast, or more so at the time, I believe it was watching Ben Pakulski on YouTube. reached out to him similar to the way you reached out to Jay. One thing led to another. I wound up in an internship at MI40 with him, with Joe Bennett, with Cassim Hansen. That team left. I ended up running the gym. I ended up as the head personal trainer. I ended up running all the training. Then I ended up eventually leaving and starting my own business and going from there. But it's just nuts to me how similar a story that is. And that brings me to my point of perseverance is going to be the biggest tool out of anything. So we're going to talk about supplements and drugs today. We're going to talk about training today. But no matter what you're doing, you got to be a perseverant son of a bitch. And that's the only way that you're guaranteed to make it, because the only way that you're going to fail at whatever you're trying to do is if you stop doing it. So there's always a way to just put your nose down and kind of run through the brick wall. And your story is a testament to that. I feel that because it reflects my own, even down to the fact that I was diagnosed with low testosterone due to pituitary damage from concussions. So literally the same reason that I got on testosterone replacement in my mid-20s. So that's to say something about concussions as well. So definitely wanted to touch on that for anybody that might reflect or look at their own story as something similar to this. I would call my story a success story. I would certainly call your story a success story. And it's only getting bigger and better for both of us, it seems. So anybody going through something like that, I'm not trying to make this one of those types of podcasts, but motherfuckers, keep at it, because you'll get to where you want to go, or you'll get somewhere you didn't know that you wanted to go, which is crazy. So diving into the stuff that really matters now, or at least the stuff that the people are here for. When you started learning more and more about these different ways to optimize performance and what else was out there, what were some of the things beyond testosterone replacement that first started really catching your eye that you would experiment with, that you noticed like, holy shit, there's some legitimacy here?
Yeah, I think if we go beyond the scope of just like traditional steroids or traditional testosterone replacement, whatever it is, which, whether it's football or wrestling is kind of, underground speaking, like out there. I think it was the exposure to J and peptides that I saw. I was like, oh, okay, there's something different here that is outsized beyond that traditional framework that was kind of built in the 80s and 90s and then led to today, to where in the last 10 to 15 years, we've really seen this explosion of peptides. So I would say it's peptides. I think the first, what's funny, dude, is this was actually before I started testosterone therapy. So a lot of guys start testosterone therapy and they're scared of needles. They're so scared of needles. They can't do it or whatever. And they use every excuse in the book to like avoid needles. And I never had that fear. Like I was like, once I found out what the issue was with my life, I was like, give me the testosterone or whatever. And I remember I was actually doing a natural bodybuilding show, and the coach I had at the time, he had recommended that I take Super Shredder from Amino Asylum. And for people who don't know, maybe it wasn't Super Shredder, maybe it was the Shredder, but it's basically like, it's like a lipo-C blend. So it's L-carnitine, MIC, and maybe a couple other things I can't think of off the top of my head, but basically just some aminos and some L-carnitine. And I remember taking that for the first time. I was like, whoa, this is like anything. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced in terms of like the pump I had at the gym and everything. And then also too, I remember injecting glutathione. And I remember that time because I had such low testosterone, probably elevated liver enzymes, probably all this other inflammatory cascade type things going on in my body. And I remember like the 2 or 3 days after I injected glutathione for the first time, which I used like you don't have to do this now, but I used like a 23 gauge 1-inch needle to inject glutathione. And glutathione burns anyway, but if you do it in a big needle, you can use like a 28 gauge and still get it. But I remember doing that and it burned so bad. But I remember the next 2 or 3 days, I felt so much better. And I was like, wow, there is tools out there to do this. So it was actually right before I started testosterone. Those were kind of some things that I took, and I was like, oh, okay, like these really moved the needle. And I think once I started testosterone, I got into peptides, got into like the growth hormone peptides, ipamorelin, tesamorelin. And it was kind of funny because testosterone solves a lot of problems for most people. I think whether it's autoimmune disease, whether it's lack of motivation, drive, energy, any of those things, usually sexual function is the last thing, but it's usually like a lifestyle thing where people that can't like connect the dots. And even motivated people like me and you can get so far being a type A person that's super motivated, but it ultimately is like about execution in your life, whether that's business, relationships, or whatever. And I think that's what testosterone does. But once I started throwing in like an ipamorelin or tesamorelin, plus some glutathione, plus some L-carnitine, I was like, wow, after the testosterone baseline is built, I was like, there's all these different pathways that we can stimulate. There's the growth hormone pathway. And then there's metformin. And what metformin did for my gut to help systemic inflammation, because I had a severely inflamed gut all through childhood from having acne and being on antibiotics. And then most football players have severely inflamed guts anyway, because you have to eat 6,000 calories just to keep your weight on so you don't get bullied around by 300-pound offensive linemen and stuff. And so it was kind of like piece by piece. I would say, testosterone was the baseline, and then some L-carnitine, some growth hormone peptides, some metformin, and it all of a sudden, like I was sleeping better, I felt better, I had more motivation. And then what happens is these are little building blocks that, it's cool for your physical health. I had a good physique before. Like I was a big guy, I was like 230 pounds when I played football. I lost a lot of weight, but it wasn't like if you saw me, you'd be like, oh, that guy lifts. But it wasn't so much, my physique transformed with testosterone, but it was really those micro things that kind of changed my consciousness in a way, because I was sleeping better, I was less stressed, and my gut was healthier, and all those different things that, like typically even the bodybuilding world doesn't really think about, that contributes to how well people perform, that all of a sudden I woke up like a year or two later, probably when I was like 27, 28, after I started testosterone, once I started doing all those things, and I was like, wow, my life is a 180. And it wasn't that it was bad before, but just how I feel every single morning when I get up, I'm motivated, I want to do stuff, I have energy all day, really helps. So I would say those were kind of the baselines. And if you see people come into this world, that's usually kind of how they start. They might not start with testosterone, but it's usually like a growth hormone peptide, some L-carnitine, something to help sensitize the insulin pathway, so like a metformin, even dihydroberberine. We can talk about GLP-1s later because those weren't even around back then. But I would say it was those things that I really saw that testosterone was good, but like every other area of my life could be improved when I added in some of those other pathways.
So the growth hormone releasing peptides, the secretagogues, if you will, so these are kind of like your entry level peptides for a lot of people. Like you said, it's where people generally start. Now, I think most people are in agreement that like exogenous human growth hormone, medically prescribed, or at least from a medically prescribed source, is kind of your king as far as all GH analogs will go. But these growth hormone releasing peptides, the GHRPs, the GHRHs, these are different but similar. Now, a lot of them have a lot of crossover and carryover effects that make them similar to each other. And there's dozens of them. We can go into like the GHRP2s, the GHRP6s of back in the day that are a little outdated now. And then you're looking at different things like your hexarelin that's available now, which has some benefits as far as cardiac function and shifting vagal tone. You have your ipamorelin, which is excellent because it's very multifaceted, but won't raise prolactin or cortisol. You have your Tesamorelin that gets a ton of hype because of its affinity to burn off body fat. And then you have like your AODs, your HGH fragments. Like, how do you go about picking which one is right for you?
I think everyone should work to experiment with all of them. I think though, when you're starting down the path, my opinion would be everyone start with ipamorelin. That's what I did, and that's actually what Jake was mentoring me at the time to do. Ipamorelin, I think, is the cleanest, purest, least side effect way to enter into the growth hormone arena. Now, most kids will start with like MK677 because it's capsule. They don't have to inject anything. They can buy it on a website. I think there's a use case for everything. I think the use case for MK is probably much less than a lot of people would argue. But I think ipamorelin is the cleanest, most multi-dimensional one that people can use and not have any bad side effects. Where most people will go wrong is they get an ipamorelin CJC 1295 no DAC blend, and a lot of people will get flushing or they'll get an increased heart rate from the CJC, and they're like, oh, well, I can't take that because they had the blend with that in ipamorelin. But I think really men and women can start with ipamorelin and have improved sleep, all the benefits from growth hormone, better fat loss, better skin, better hair, and all those things. So I really like starting with ipamorelin. And then from there, I said, like, people branching out. It's like, okay, now I'm going to go to Tesamorelin. I think Tesamorelin for men is probably a little bit better, but you might get a little bit more bloating / water retention in the process of losing the fat. It's kind of ironic because you'll lose more lower belly fat with Tesamorelin, but after a few weeks, depending on your response, you may be a little bit more water retentive. So it's kind of the same thing. If you're taking a lot of growth hormone, it can, build muscle and burn fat, but you get a little bit more water retention. But I think people should start with ipamorelin and then kind of branch out and experiment with whatever works best for them. I think a lot of men are going to land on Tesamorelin. Obviously, like you said, growth hormone is the gold standard. That's what I use. I don't even mess around with those peptides anymore because I have growth hormone. I think you could maybe make a case that you could like adjunct use some of those with growth hormone in certain phases to get the benefits of like Tesamorelin for fat loss or sleep. But I like starting at ipamorelin and then kind of branching out. Tesamorelin next, maybe do a CJC no DAC, maybe do an ipamorelin CJC no DAC blend. And then, you could get into the ones like hexarelin or even like the GHRPs and see how you respond. But I kind of like that pathway. That's where I started. And I think for me, it was really good because I kind of I was able to like stack up how I responded to each of them and see like what works best for me. And then when you decide to put your big boy pants on, then you can get growth hormone. But I do think it's good for people, especially younger people, to start there and then kind of find their way to growth hormone rather than just starting with growth hormone itself. And to talk about what we were talking about earlier with the pituitary thing, I didn't realize actually how suppressed my IGF had been, because when you have suppression of pituitary function from concussions, all of a sudden when you start to raise IGF, because you don't produce as much growth hormone IGF from the pituitary as much, I was like, wow, I'm sleeping so much better and my fat loss and everything is so much better than it had been before. And I think there's also a lot of that going on that we don't realize. We know testosterone for the most part for people that get into that world, but they don't realize how much like the actual growth hormone pathway is suppressed from having concussions or blast trauma or whatever it is. So
now, pertaining to the Tesamorelin, how much more dramatic is the fat loss, particularly around the midsection, from that one as opposed to the other ones? And is it equal to exogenous growth hormone or better than?
It's definitely better than all the other peptides. I would say if I had to put it on a percentage basis, I'd probably say it's like 40 to 50% better than an ipamorelin for burning the lower belly fat, particularly in men. Now, women, like a lot of women, especially leaner women, like my fiance Taylor, she likes it for like 3 or 4 days and then she starts to get bloated. And even though she knows she's losing fat, the look in the mirror that you have when you like are bloated from retaining water, and women also have menstrual cycles. So like depending on where they are in their cycle, they may be a little bit more bloated anyway. They might not like it, but some women respond great to it. I think it's probably the older demographic of women that respond better to it than the younger demographic. But to your point about the exogenous growth hormone, what's interesting is not a lot of times, but sometimes I will use both of them together. So I'll use HGH in the morning at like 1 IU and then maybe 1 milligram or even 2 milligrams of Tesamorelin at night, maybe for 4 to 6 weeks. And I would definitely say, as opposed to doing 1 IU of growth in the morning and then 1 or 2 IUs of growth in the evening, or even just 2 IUs of growth in the evening, there is more fat loss from the Tesamorelin. But it's going to stop in about like 4 to 6 weeks in, because usually that's when your body kind of builds up a tolerance to that dose. So you either have to escalate the dose, which you might not want to do because you're going to get the water retention, or you just come off of it, cycle off, and then go back to growth hormone. So I would say specifically for lower belly fat, Tesamorelin is probably a little bit better for a 4 to 6 week period than growth hormone itself. But over a long period of time, like if I only had one, it would be growth hormone, because the growth hormone, obviously, you're not going to build up the immunogenicity to it. You're not going to have the same kind of tolerance build up that you would get to Tesamorelin. So for the long term, I would say growth hormone year round is best for keeping you lean. But if you're like, okay, I really want to get diced in 4 weeks, just throw in Tesamorelin at night, growth hormone in the morning, and the benefits are definitely pronounced as opposed to just growth hormone itself.
Now, staying on the topic of getting absolutely diced, getting shredded, it's spring, summer, depending on when somebody's listening to this, if it's when it's released or shortly thereafter. We have a lot of tools at our disposal now, probably more than ever, and especially looking in comparison to what we were talking about before, when you would look at like ephedra, caffeine, aspirin, and clenbuterol as your 2 main options, maybe thyroid hormone. Now you're looking at everything else at our disposal. It's insane how much stuff that we have. And one of the biggest categories that seems to be blowing up is the mitochondrial support supplements. So I personally am a massive fan of SLU PP332. I think that molecule is absolutely amazing for fat loss. I've utilized MOTS-C with a lot of success. That one works a little bit differently. I have some BAM15. I actually did pick that up from the BioLongevity Labs sale when you guys released it. So I'm sitting on that one. I'm waiting to kind of implement that into my plan also. But all of these things work a little bit differently, but they work on a mitochondrial level. And some of them looking at like your MOTS-C, which is pretty good for fat loss, but it might not be, in my opinion, as dramatic, but for cellular health, it's great. Going into the SLU, which to this point is one of the most dramatic things I've taken for fat loss ever. And I've taken a lot of stuff for fat loss. And then diving into BAM15, which works as an uncoupling agent, which is a whole other level. what are these drugs doing and how do we take them? We can't take them all at once. We know that, but what's the usage or the proper usage of these as opposed to another? How do we select which mitochondrial peptide we're going to use if that's our goal or that's the path we want to take to get shredded?
Yeah, well, I'll set it up and say when it comes to fat loss, let's just look in the bodybuilding context. I think bodybuilders, though, have pretty much like always been the pinnacle of how to lose fat and then maintain muscle at the same time, going back to whenever bodybuilding was first started. So if you look at the traditional pathway or kind of route or roadmap of what bodybuilders do to get shredded going into a contest, it's testosterone pathway, and then they've got the growth hormone pathway, which may or not get pulled depending on how close or how well the person's responding. But then we have kind of like the cleanse, the T3s, that whole world to where really, if you look at what we're doing, they can work, but we're loading up oxidative stress on the body. We also, for a lot of guys, they're going to hit, aromatase inhibitors because they really want to get that dry look. We don't have to really talk about that, but I think whether or not you go down that pathway of inhibiting estrogen, you probably don't need to do that now, given access to what we have from a mitochondrial support. So if you look at like the traditional roadmap, bodybuilders basically build up 16 weeks of unreal oxidative stress on the body. And so for 4 weeks, you're probably okay. And then you kind of like increase the drugs and then you get into orals. And so you're really just like suppressing like the body. You're basically beating the body into submission. And a lot of people will stall out along that path, or even if they don't stall out, you have to continue to cut calories. You have to continue to increase orals or increase the thyroid medication or increase the clen or whatever it is, or yohimbine, or some of these things that really, really stress the body out. And that's why, I've done it before. Like when you get down to those single digit body fat / like last few weeks of a prep, you're basically running on spirit. To go back to the what we were talking about earlier, it's really willpower because your body is shut down at that standpoint. And if you look at it, there's this cascade of oxidative stress that is completely just like decimated the body. And so that's why it's like really a mental game at that point because you're calorie depleted and you've got all these things going on. Now, for the last few years, we've had this explosion of mitochondrial peptides and what they do in the context of fat loss. One, they work great for fat loss themselves because everything happens at a mitochondrial level. So like how we produce testosterone, how we create fat loss, how we create muscle gain, all happens at a mitochondrial level. And so if you look at the oxidative stress that is coming from the dieting, the training, the drugs on someone that is losing fat, that is suppressing mitochondrial function. So while you're like revving the gas pedal on all these different pathways, you're actually creating a cascade of effects that impair mitochondrial function. And a lot of the people, historically speaking, don't do anything to address that because it's just like less food, more drugs, more cardio, which all creates oxidative stress. But when we look at the mitochondrial pathway, we can introduce some of these things like an SLU, like MOTS-C, even like a methylene blue, or then a BAM15 to kind of come in and basically elevate mitochondrial function in the process of all of that oxidative stress going on in the body, and then preventing some of it from happening and assisting with everything that's going on from a diet, training, calorie perspective there. So really what we're doing is unloading some of the oxidative stress. We probably don't even need to hit some of those pathways that we were doing before with like a clen or maybe a T3 or whatever. And we're increasing fat loss from a mitochondrial level. Now, what does that mean practically speaking? Well, it means you could stay leaner throughout the whole year while building muscle and in an off season, but then also in the context of like prepping for a show or even just looking lean, you don't have to kill yourself dieting. And we're not even talking about the GLP-1s yet, but those introduce like a whole different concept around this, which we can talk about. But when we look at the mitochondrial support, whether it's MOTS-C or SLU or BAM15 or all of them combined, what they're doing is allowing you to push your body to the point of getting lean without the suffering, without maximizing the oxidative stress on all those different pathways and potentially avoiding some of the more dangerous compounds that we would have in the past, because these are actually good for our long-term health. They're good for longevity and everything if they're used properly. So I think really what they do is they kind of keep that oxidative stress load off the body while allowing you to get down to your leanest body fat percentage in a way that isn't, super depressing or super just like to the point where you're running on spirit. So
Right. And I couldn't agree with that more. I think another important thing to look at alongside its lack of oxidative stress, at least in relation to the other options that were traditionally out there, even in relation to just hardcore extreme dieting, is if you look at your nervous system as sympathetic versus parasympathetic, what are our traditional fat burners based on? Heavy stimulants, one way or another. Now, granted, something like a clenbuterol or even an albuterol, the stimulant effect is really more of a side effect as opposed to what we're really trying to do and light up certain receptors in fat cells. But the stimulant's there and we can't avoid it. Ephedra caffeine aspirin, stimulant. Yohimbine, still technically a stimulant. All of these things are driving you into that sympathetic nervous system state that's go, 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 and you're further away from rest and digest when you're going to recover and then get rid of that oxidative stress. Whereas these mitochondrial support peptides, as long as, like you said, they're done intelligently and not overdone, you're not jacking up your nervous system. You can actually remain in a parasympathetic state, which in turn is better for fat burning, but also isn't going to dysregulate your nervous system and rob you from recovery. There's just so many aspects where these things are just intelligent add-ons. You just have to know how to add them on and how to do it correctly. Now, I definitely want to talk about GLPs because for all the information that we have out there, Lord knows you and Jay have put out so much good information on GLPs. There's still this massive amount of misconception that's out there, and people are looking at that. People are looking at them even from the bodybuilding world and even from the online fitness world as a simple, like, you don't need that. It just makes you nauseous. Just have willpower. Just don't eat. They're looking at it from that Ozempic lens of, you're going to take this, you're going to get really nauseous, so you're not going to eat, so you're going to starve, you're going to lose muscle, you're going to rebound later, et cetera, et cetera. There's other stuff out there. And I personally am a massive fan of using retatrutide and cagrilintide myself, but there's terzapeptide. There's new generations coming out. There's a ton of stuff coming out in the GLP category, but there's still this misconception. So what is it that GLPs are doing? Let's clear this up once and for all, because they're not just making you sick and starve.
Yeah, for sure. So if we look at, let's look in the context of like anti-aging and longevity first. So a lot of people have probably heard the word inflammaging, right? It's inflammation and aging. Inflammation causes aging. Well, what causes inflammation? It's basically the body's inability to regulate insulin production. Now, what causes that? Well, one, our lifestyle causes it. Stress causes it. Lack of testosterone can cause that. And as we age, we just don't process insulin the same way we did as when we were younger. That's why when you're 15, you can eat McDonald's and stay lean. Most people. A lot of people now can't because of, epigenetic, like transcription across generations. But, the same person that eats McDonald's when they're 15 versus 55, the person that's 55 is going to get much fatter from that McDonald's and they're going to feel way worse than the kid that's 15. Why is that? Because as we age, this whole insulin cycle that's going on in the body becomes impaired. Now, if we look at that as really the main cause of aging, that insulin cycle and the inability to maintain the way we were when we were younger is what creates oxidative stress in the body that causes aging. So inflammaging and inflammation is caused from the inability to regulate insulin as we get older. And regardless of how fit we stay, you can really, without any drugs or supplements or whatever, maintain decent insulin function. But I guarantee you, everything from a lifestyle standpoint, if you do it perfectly, when you're 60, it's not going to be the same as when you're 30. And when you're 30, it's not going to be the same as when you were 15. That's just life. As we get older, that whole cycle becomes impaired, and that's what causes a lot of inflammation as we age. Throw in stress, lifestyle factors, environmental factors, and all those things. It just is not the same as we get older. So if we understand that is really the main variable that is driving aging and inflammation as we age, enter the GLP-1 peptides. So if we can do, I love thinking of concepts, right? So if we can change the concept around GLP-1s as not the nausea-creating drugs that just keep you from eating because they create nausea, as really more the insulin regulation drugs that improve pancreatic function, that improve all these other biomarkers because they help with that insulin cycle and regulating the insulin cycle. Now, all of a sudden, they actually, in my opinion, are the greatest drug invention since penicillin, because what they can do relative to being used to the right dose in the right manner to help improve and stem the tide of the downregulation of that insulin cycle as we age that becomes impaired is unparalleled. And if you look now what is going on now that we have a sample size of a few years, going back to semaglutide, which is Ozempic and Wegovy, the reduction in cardiovascular events, adverse cardiovascular events for people that have been on these medications, which these people are dumpster fires because they are diabetic and they have all these things, it is profound. And these are people that are not changing their lifestyle. These are people that are not eating healthy. They're not dieting. They're not doing cardio. They're not doing things. And I talked to a guy that's really high up in a state's health department that pays out Medicaid. And he said, if we could do one thing, it's get semaglutide, which obviously that's because what he knows and what Medicaid pays for, into as many hands as possible. Because when you look in the reduction in payouts that we're paying to people that have heart attacks and strokes and those things that are on that, it is unparalleled. Meaning that what it is doing to help extend the life of people that are more or less dumpster fires because they don't change their diet, they're just injecting, a GLP-1 to prevent them from having heart disease and strokes and all these things, which are really the leading cause of death, is profound. So if we think of them more is assisting in the regulation of the insulin cycle that's going on in the body, all of a sudden now we have the most profound anti-aging and longevity medications in all time. And like you said, we now have retatrutide and we have some of these more advanced ones that are even coming down the pipeline that have less side effects and more benefits than even semaglutide itself. So they're really not like a hack or a cheat code just to diet and suppress your appetite. They're really reversing aging in the body because of what it's doing to the insulin cycle. So I think they're absolutely the best thing we have. And what Jay and I's mission in helping bring information to the world about these is they're not just for fat people. They're not just for diabetic people. They're for people that want to live healthy and live long and live strong. And whether that means you're a bodybuilder or you're a weekend warrior or you're just training for fun, and you want to look good, used in the right fashion at a microdose and the appropriate doses with the appropriate lifestyle interventions, they're the greatest thing that we have access to, and there will be more to even come down the pipe. So
I've noticed personally with retatrutide, and I've used it at varying doses, experimenting on myself since early December, maybe even late November, that in the beginning, pretty gnarly appetite suppressant. I wasn't nauseous or anything like that, but I definitely ate a lot less. As I adjusted to it, when I stopped bringing the dose up, when I decided I'm just going to kind of coast here and kind of reap the benefits outside of the actual lack of hunger, I started noticing that I felt like I was partitioning nutrients better. So I started feeling like if I ate more carbs, I could actually handle more carbs. Now, I would get fuller quicker, and I still do, but my appetite's fine. I'm still eating. I maintain now fairly low calories for somebody of my size. I eat about 2,400 calories a day. That's kind of what I allow myself in terms of what my caloric intake is. My macros shift a little bit based on what type of training I'm doing that given day, but I can always get that. I usually don't crave a lot more, but I can still go out with the missus for a cheat meal. I might not put down a whole pizza, but I'll put down a good amount of food. And again, it just feels like I'm storing that food better. Now, I know this has something to do with like the GIP pathway with glucagon. So how is this working? Now, not exactly. I don't need the mechanisms of action to a complete scientific degree, but is this moving things around in a place where they're supposed to go? Is this anabolic in a sense? Is this like almost like a bodybuilder taking exogenous insulin in a way? But like how would you describe what's going on here?
Kind of all of the above. The first thing to understand is, one, it's helping the body produce insulin more when it needs it. So again, why do people could become diabetic? Because they're shoveling down glucose into the body. The pancreas gets tired and it cannot produce the amount of insulin needed to bring down blood sugar. And so what happens, you have a diabetic, they end up needing to get on exogenous insulin. Then take a bodybuilder. Why do they use exogenous insulin? Because it helps partition the nutrients better. It helps with anabolism. It helps all those things. Well, a bodybuilder is using insulin because they cannot produce the insulin from their pancreas enough to handle the carbohydrates and partition those carbohydrates as muscle. So that's where you saw this skyrocketing and how big guys got in bodybuilding when they started using growth hormone and insulin, because the insulin was helping shuttle all those carbohydrates into the muscle and actually use them rather than remaining in the bloodstream, causing all the oxidative stress and then causing a bunch of problems in the body from eating all the food that they're eating. So GLP-1s, and tirzepatide does this better than semaglutide, but retatrutide does it even better than tirzepatide, help the body and the pancreas produce insulin when the body needs it. And so when you're a fitness person and you eat carbohydrates to fuel your training, all of a sudden now, think of having a really old bus. I like to make analogies for stuff to make it really simple. Like our carbohydrates and the insulin pathway we have a bus, and that helps like shuttle the protein into the muscle, and then it helps the muscle regrow, right? Well, you can only fit so many people on that bus. That's the carbohydrates. And so if you can only fit so many people on that bus, the extra carbohydrates that you eat are just going to turn into fat. But if you're using insulin, which can have its cascade of side effects if you're taking too much, you see that in the bodybuilding world, where like too much insulin use causes like the bubble gut and whatever. But if we adapt the body through using something like retatrutide to now be better at regulating the amount of insulin that I need to help bring my blood sugar down, all of a sudden I'm tuning up the bus that can now carry those carbohydrates into the muscle. So my body is getting much more efficient at taking the carbs that I'm eating already and then shuttle the protein and help get that into the muscle. So that's where, in a way, it's almost anabolic. Now, you've got to eat the protein, you've got to do the weight training, you've got to do those things. But if you improve that process in the body, it's going to make it work that much better. So that's what it's really doing. And it's pretty cool because you don't have to be a fat person to benefit from that. Like, we're from the bodybuilding / performance enhancement side of things, to where it's like you were saying, you can eat a cheat meal and all of a sudden that cheat meal doesn't affect you the same way from an oxidative stress standpoint as it maybe would have before, because now my body can produce insulin a little bit better, help bring my blood sugar down, and then help partition those nutrients a little bit better. So there's a lot going on like underneath mechanistically, but from a level, just think about it as like, okay, now my body's able to shuttle that carbohydrate into the muscle more efficiently because I can now produce insulin more efficiently than I would have before. And in doing so, I'm taking the oxidative stress load off my body, which is going to improve lipid markers, which is going to improve cognition, which is then going to improve inflammation in the body. It's going to help with my joints and everything else. So if we improve that cycle, then all of a sudden everything else in the body gets that much healthier.
Now, two things that you mentioned before that I feel would be applicable alongside a GLP or even alongside a growth hormone peptide or even alongside the mitochondrial peptides would be the injectable L-carnitine and the injectable glutathione. To me, these are multifaceted products that really everybody can benefit from taking. Now, the glutathione relieving or reducing that oxidative stress like we talked about, where does the carnitine come into play? Because that's a big fat loss player, but that's also a general performance player. How does that aid the process?
Yeah, carnitine is amazing. Some people don't get post-injection pain from it. I do from time to time. Sometimes I don't, sometimes I do. I wish I could take more carnitine. So basically the rate limiting factor of how much carnitine I take is the fact that it can cause post-injection pain, or you can get like welts from it, or you just end up injecting too much. But to your point, carnitine is kind of also similar to this mitochondrial pathway because it's helping with the cell membrane, helping with mitochondrial function within the cell membrane. So the L-carnitine is really doing a lot of things similar to the mitochondrial peptides, but then it has a whole host of other benefits. So again, if we think of like, not blasting all of the necessary like anabolic pathways, it's going to have a whole host of functions. One thing that I think is really cool that it does is it helps with androgen receptor sensitivity and androgen receptor density. Now, what does that mean in an easy way to understand? It means the androgens that we're using, even if it's just testosterone replacement therapy, are having a better gas mileage, meaning that 200 milligrams per week of testosterone goes way further if you're injecting 500 milligrams of L-carnitine every day than it would by itself, because it's helping with the androgen receptor density and sensitivity of the cell to have a better binding affinity. So when we look at that, it's like, okay, if I'm doing all these things to enhance what I'm doing, I could potentially not burden myself with extra oxidative stress through more drugs or whatever. But even for someone that's natural, that's not on testosterone therapy or not on anabolic steroids, I have actually seen in younger men doubling of their testosterone levels and doubling of their free testosterone levels just from L-carnitine supplementation. And so it's like, everyone will debate about whether testosterone boosters work or not. For the love of God, just use some L-carnitine, and it at least is going to help with the density and sensitivity of the androgen receptor, and it's going to improve it there. But then you can, extrapolate that to someone that is using testosterone therapy. So it kind of is one of those things. It just makes everything in the body work better. Same thing with glutathione. Glutathione master antioxidant. So when we bring down oxidative stress in the body, obviously everything's going to work better. So I guess in context of like polypharmacy, because that's what we do, right? We talk about peptides and hormones and everything else. If we have some of these key players just in the background all the time, it's going to make everything we do work that much better, while also keeping the body from being in a super stressed out state, maybe from some of the training or extreme dieting or whatever that we're doing.
honestly, this new medication revolution, if you want to call it that we're in right now as a society, or maybe it sounds cooler to call it like a performance enhancement renaissance. We'll think of a cool tag word for it. We're at this apex right now. And maybe that's the wrong way of saying it, because I don't even think we're close to the apex here. But we're at this high point in performance enhancement, longevity, and just medication in general that we have so much at our fingertips that I beg everybody watching this to do their due diligence and do their research and dive into the options that are out there, because chances are you've just begun to scratch the surface of what's available to you, not only to get to your goals faster, but to overall increase your quality of life, to increase the quality of life of your loved ones. The buck doesn't stop with athletes here. This is stuff that our parents can be on, our grandparents can be on to an extent. I'm not saying put grandma on BAM 15 necessarily. Maybe there's a use case scenario there somewhere.
Yeah.
But there's so many options that we have out there, and there's so much information. And that's what we try to do here, is bring you guys the information, or at least the people that are bringing you the information that are doing it the right way, that are bringing you the right information with the right research behind it, that are teaching you the right ways to apply it. Hunter, this has been fantastic. And I know you and I could go on for hours upon hours here. If people want to absorb more of your content directly, where can they find you?
Yeah, easiest way is just go to YouTube. Just search Hunter Williams Health on YouTube, or you just Hunter Williams anything on YouTube. It should pop up. And then also too, I take all the audio clip or the audio recordings out of my YouTube videos, and I publish those on a podcast, which is on iTunes and Spotify. So that's the easiest thing. And I have a ton of content out there. I usually publish 2 videos a week. Sometimes I think they're pretty dry and boring, but people like them. So I just do slide presentations and go through stuff. And what I appreciate now is, when I was kind of starting out, I didn't know kind of like what content to publish. And I think a lot of people are kind of in the same boat when they're starting out in this world. And I'll say that, like, anyone that is out there listening to this, just by being exposed to Drew and I, and then being in this world, you probably know enough to create content around some of this and at least share your experience with that. So I always love to tell people that, because at one point I was like a guy driving around my car listening to this stuff and thinking like, man, it would be so cool to make a living and be involved with this and get to work with the people in this industry. And so I always just remind everyone of that, to just, make content, share content with the world, because if you're listening to this, you're ahead of 99% of people out there, and then you can share your experiences and then kind of help drive the community forward. But those are the easiest places to find me. And it's really cool now, because what I will say in like the last year or two that's happened is we've had such an amazing community of people and amazing support that now I get to see thousands of people's experience across all these different agents and products and everything, and then synthesize that into content that really helps people. So the more we can have conversations like this with Drew, and the more people can comment on videos and share their experiences with this, whether you decide to create content around it or not, it kind of helps drive the community forward. And like Drew was saying, we are moving at an exponential rate as some of these different drugs, medications, supplements start to come out. The more people that can share their experience, the more people are involved in the community. It just makes the world better. And ultimately, my mission is to make the world a healthier and more prosperous place. And the more people we can get taking GLP-1s and BAM 15 and SLU, the better they're going to feel in life. And then the more motivated they're going to be to go out and be in service to other people and help other people and make the world a better place. So I'll just say that. And Drew, thank you so much for having me on and spotlighting this. I know it went by so fast. I was like, man, it's already an hour in. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here again, man. I know you're a busy guy, so thank you so much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the DDT Method Podcast. Please follow Hunter Williams on all platforms. We'll be linking to those in the show notes. And until next time, just absorb the information that's out there, because there's so much of it.